All right, I'm so excited to welcome Dr. Sam Shay. He is the neurodiverse doc who helps neurodiverse adults overcome the unique challenges of living in a normie world. Dr. Sam himself is on the spectrum and has dedicated his life to advocacy and support for those on the spectrum. With over 25 years of combined experience in nutrition, genetics, and functional lab testing, Dr. Sam created the Neuro Harmony Model and DNA decoded programs, data-driven strategies to help parents boost their energy, enhance their mental clarity, and create supportive environments where their children can thrive. And addition to his clinical work, Dr. Sam is a neurospicy comic who advocates for neurodiverse individuals with a comedic style that's clean, witty, intelligent, and story driven. In his 1 hour comedy special, Neurospicy, Love, Life, and Comedy on the Spectrum, he shares his journey and includes powerful insights on embracing neurodiversity. He's also a funny keynote speaker for associations and corporations on neurodiversity to help provide a more harmonious and productive working environment for all. Welcome. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me.
Thanks, Megan. It's good to be here.
So, I wanted to start off with just thinking about labels. How do you think about them? Neurodiversity, neurodistinct, all of these different labels.
Sure. I have a whole, in the first 5 minutes of the show, I talk about labels up for the history of there's his labels and so on because it's important to the work. Everyone understands what definitions people are coming from, and labels are quite a hot topic. I mean, I make a joke in the show that people disagree over labels and definitions. Society can't even agree if pineapple belongs on pizza.
So
So. With that understanding in mind, I describe neurodiversity as the entire pie, and neurodistinction is an individual's unique slice of the pie.
mhm.
And some people have a bigger slice than others in the neurodiverse pie. So you've got people who are in the line of work you are like twice exceptional. You got people who are combinations. Like I'm a combination of Asperger's and ADHD. And some people listening, their ears will perk up when I say, well, Asperger's is an outdated term. And and I address that in the show, but just for sake of everyone listening, I personally want to reclaim the term Asperger's. I understand Dr. Asperger's had dubious ties to the Nazi Party, and I want to point out that whether or not he was complicit just for context, people don't even know, the Nazis took Dr. Asperger's work on these what he called the little professors and use it to justify the sterilization or elimination of quote unquote undesirable children. And I would have been one of those undesirable children if I was back in that era in Austria during that time period. Um, and it's hotly debated whether or not Dr. Asperger was complicit. I mean, obviously his daughter is fighting on his behalf. Dr. Tony Atwood, also who wrote the book The Complete Guide to Asperger's Syndrome, he says that Dr. Asperger was trying to save the kids. And then you got other people in the field. I believe Barrett Cohen in particular says that Asperger was actually in cahoots with the Nazis. And if I'm misattributing Barrett Cohen's work to that, then I deeply apologize. I just have this memory that it is him. If it's not, I deeply apologize. I don't want to. So that's the memory I have. Forgive me. Someone fact check me. Um, the uh, but the point is that whether or not he was complicit or not to me is absolutely irrelevant because it was Asperger's syndrome that brought the Nazis down, and I can prove it with three names: Oppenheimer, Einstein, and Turing, all three of them.
Mhm.
And so I honestly couldn't care less if Asperger was goose stepping across his clinic because it was Asperger's syndrome. Frankenstein's monster brought him down. Like he's the doctor. People on the spectrum were like his little monster. I was like, great, we took you down, asshole. And I really don't care what his perspective was. I'm quite proud of the fact that Asperger's stopped the war. Uh, and that should be something that everyone on the spectrum should be proud of. It's that whether or not it was Asperger's specifically, it's the fact that someone who's neurodiverse, what actually several people that you can point to as the three biggest luminaries. Obviously, there was other people involved, but they're the three big names. So I occupy the Asperger's and ADHD segment of that pie, and my when someone's asked me like, well, are labels helpful or not? I says, well, they're about as fraught and as helpful as any label of anything.
Hmm.
And the intention of having a label is to create a an archetype of understanding. So we have a low resolution set of preformed understandings about a particular person. I mean, you can go back to the Greek myths and you got the 12 gods on sitting on Mount Olympus, and you got, for the people who are super nerdy, you got Hestia, who gave up her seat and went, down to sit amongst the people. And then you've got Chiron, who's like neither centaur nor god, but somehow is this important continuity between all of them. You've got these 12 archetypes, and that you can have an understanding of, what's the goddess of wisdom, what's the god of war, what's the goddess of love, what's the god of the ocean, and you can have these you can have these useful labels that can then also be either weaponized or misunderstood or misattributed and cause their own problems. So they're just as useful and as harmful or as fraud as any other label. And it's like asking, oh, what do you do for a living? It's like, oh, you're an entrepreneur. As if that encompasses the totality of what someone is, but it's a non-trivial part of what one does.
Hmm.
So I'd say that uh, the labels are, I personally found the label extremely useful because now I had a preloaded set of context, information, and history, and a community that I was like, oh, I'm not, I used to think I was unique and quirky, but now it turns out I'm just a diagnosis code. Okay, great. It was helpful to give me and others around me something to really grok and to understand. And also, look, I grew up with very deeply unsympathetic parents around this, and my mother thought I was attention seeking when really I was just flailing because I was just so sensory overwhelmed. And no one I had a horrible time growing up because I didn't understand what was happening with all the sensory overwhelm. And I also had the I had the adorable trait of believing what people said. It was so cute in grade school. People would say things and do the opposite, and I was confused by that. I don't know. It's something clearly wrong with me.
Hmm.
So it didn't I didn't understand that other people were thinking different because I didn't have a working theory of mind. I did have the Greek myths, and I did have comedy satire I mean, that's what I retreated to comedy shows on television, and to under try to I looked at comedy shows like an anthropologist, so like I try to understand what's going on here. At least in comedy shows like sitcom, situational comedy, you have archetypes, literally archetypes.
Yep.
And I mean, one of the most popular shows in the 90s in the world was Married with Children. Now, I was self-aware enough to realize that was satire, but Peggy, Al, etc., they all occupied a very specific archetype of a dysfunctional, middle class American family. And it was helpful. It was so helpful to actually have just a very clean, consistent example of a personality that was narratively consistent throughout multiple situations.
Totally. Yeah, I agree with what you're talking about with the labels of it has been so helpful in so many ways for me and people in my community to just be able to see it, find our tribe, see our traits through a strength-based lens, and then know that it's just sort of the entry point to understanding someone. It's not a complete picture of anybody, but to have that framework. And that's so interesting about the comedy being so useful and supportive for you
Mhm.
as a child. And so, what is your goal in terms of how you use comedy now as a comedian?
So comedy, so comedy, there's the personal utility of comedy, then there's the cultural utility of comedy. Personally, I write comedy because one, it's fun. I love the structure, the rhythm, the challenge of it. It's really good comedy is like writing a really good haiku, where you're crammed into this very narrow space in order to create a meaningful effect quickly.
Mhm.
And for someone who has a tendency to be polysyllabic and long-winded, comedy forces me into a more pithy box. I also find th a comedy personally very therapeutic because and it's probably because of the way that I choose to express my comedy. And there's dozens of different types of comics. I'm sure there's some comedic historian that has created whatever the 12 types of comedy comedians or the 24 or the 27 or what. He was probably on the spectrum who wrote this theoretical book I'm talking about. Anyway, um, the the type of comedy that I write does not involve any cursing, any politics, or any cheap body fluid jokes, and is narrative and story driven and is designed to tackle a very specific topic. Now, that that may sound like I'm this air quotes superior comic. I'm not. I'm very clear on what my style of comedy is. It's no different than being I'm neuro distinct, and I'm very crystal clear on where my strengths are and where what my unique needs are. It's the same thing in comedy. If you were to take away cursing from Eddie Murphy, Chris Rock, Bill Burr, it would be a crime. It would be a literal crime to take cursing away from the people that do it really well. My only ask is if people curse is that they do it well. And if
Right.
people do story-driven narrative, non-cursing, non-political humor like me, that they do it well also. And I hold myself to a very high standard. So it's this is not a critique on other comics. It's just I want all comics. I love comedy because it's also the truest meritocracy out there. Do you make them laugh? Yes or no? Cool. You're A plus. I don't care if you drop F-bombs and talk about body fluids all day, as long as you really genuinely make people laugh instead of make them cringe. Uh, Great. Welcome.
Mhm.
So I feel like comedy is its own crucible of true meritocracy. And I really appreciate that because everyone can always hold themselves to do better, and you are not the judge of your own work. It's the audience that's the judge of your own work. And that's it. There's no ambiguity there. They either laugh or they don't. So my I use comedy to as a form of creating shared reality.
Mhm.
Now, and that's very significant because growing up, I did not have shared reality. I had what was going on in my world, and then I had everyone else outside of me calling me names and gaslighting me. And I'm also like seeing things that are clearly happening in broad daylight, and I'm being told that it's not a big deal or it didn't happen when clearly it did happen, and some very bad things were happening. And it was the only thing I had to hold on to was my fixation on what's true, what is real. And what is brilliant about comedy is that most people laugh not at what's funny. They laugh at what's true.
So true.
And if I invite anyone to reflect on the funniest comedic bits they've ever seen throughout all their history of their exposure to comedy, go back and revisit it and ask yourself the following question. Am I laughing because it's funny or am I laughing because it's true? And pretty confident 95% plus is going to be because it's true. And comedy is a vector for truth and to try to make truth palatable. And with that, you can have shared reality in real time with the people you're laughing with, not they're laughing at. So so I wrote the comedy special, as you mentioned in the intro, Neurospicy, Love, Life, and Comedy on the Spectrum. It's available for free on YouTube. And it's an hour special on what it's like to occupy the neurodiverse space, and I I wrote it to create the shared reality and community that I never had growing up. And it's the 60 minutes I wish someone shared with me 30 years ago to explain how my brain worked and how to adapt and navigate the normie world. And if someone had given me this show to watch 30 years ago, this just these my whole life would have been different, completely and utterly different, because I would have had an understanding of what is going on. And the way that I support people on the spectrum now is that I do fundraising for the kids. I was part of the fundraising effort at the recent Firefly Autism annual fundraising event. Now, to be clear, the auctioneer did the bulk of the fundraising bit, like for sure. I provided the comedic relief afterwards, after everyone donated non-trivial amounts of money to support people on the spectrum. But it's like I raised money for the kids for organizations that never existed when I desperately needed them 30 years ago. But I coach and work with adults. I don't actually work with kids, and for a variety of reasons, I don't have the setup to do it. And my one of my particular uh one of my particular manifestations of being on the spectrum is I'm extremely sensitive to high-pitched sounds, including the shrill pitches of children, and it's extremely painful, like extremely painful for me. And I've just come to peace with that. It's like, okay, I can't help the kids directly, but I can do fundraising. I can do that.
Yep.
I can do that. That's non-trivial. I can do that. But I will
Yep.
help the adults on the spectrum, and I also help the parents of children who are on the spectrum.
Yeah.
So that's how I work. And I find that, I mean, I wish there was someone like me to help me back then when I was a younger me. Um, and comedy, I find that the show itself really builds a lot of rapport with people in the neurodiverse community, because it's as clear as day. Anyone doing a 1 hour show of stand-up comedy, like, instinctively that was like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of study and work and crafting to distill it down to 60 minutes in a comedy format. Clearly, this person is dedicated. Clearly, this person cares. Clearly, this person has something to offer in support of the entire community. And that's the intersection of comedy and the coaching work.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing that you've really figured out how to, what I always say, work the way you're wired, of what are the things that fit for how I'm wired and how I can contribute with my interests and passions and strengths, and what are things that are not a good fit. And that's okay. And really setting it up so that you're doing supporting people in a really impactful way and doing it in a way that honors your own strengths and needs. So I love
Really,
that.
thank you.
So when you're doing more of the, wellness and health side of your business, what is the top problem that um, adults come with you to work with you, or parents, and then how do you use your Neuro Harmony method to support them?
So there are actually two separate uh, problems depending on the demographic. So if it's a parent that's coming to me, they have one set of major concerns. If it's an adult on the spectrum, they have a different set. Now, I'm not saying this is on average all parents, on average all adults on the spectrum, because as a practitioner, we attract a certain archetype, usually, not obviously not a singular one, but there's the general expectations here. So when someone who is on the spectrum as an adult that comes to me, usually if they're male, they're usually a male that's between 25 and 40, that has uh kind of failed to launch, especially in the social arena, and they realize, and their health and the way they care for themselves, they've realized that the way that they structure their lifestyle, their diet, their exercise, their routines, like has not worked, and they're not attracting the mate that they want. And they also, I mean, I'm also a former video game addict and a former sugar addict, and there is this trope of the 25 to 40-year-old male who is living alone or still with roommates or in mom's basement or whatever, and super smart, can hold a remote tech job, but does not really have a social life beyond video games and television shows and kind of other things that are considered to be more like high school, college era. And so they come to me with, I want someone who understands and has compassion for the way my mind works and is not going to shame me about the state that I'm in, uh, the state of health, the social life, etc. Like I mean, I haven't gone into my like I was like the beta's beta, not wasn't the doormat, I was the rug between the doormat and the floor, and how I've been able to pull myself well out of that. And so what they're looking for is someone that they view as they can aspire to be more like, someone who's very much fit, very much socially aware, and much more socially evolved to the point where they're on stage doing stand-up comedy. Uh, and has a very I mean, I love my group of friends. My group of friends are awesome and they're all fascinating people. And it's a very diverse group of friends, like very, very diverse group of friends. I'd say, like, if I were to line up my closest 25 people, first off, I have a close 25 people, which is a lot, but they're cool people and they're very different, and that's something I'm very proud of. And my I would give them a personalized, like, look at their entire lifestyle, but then also look at their labs. So the neuroharmony method is a methodology to look at the outside in, which is lifestyle, and to look from the inside out, which is labs. So we look at where the biochemical pathway has been damaged and what needs to be repaired on a nutritional level. So for example, if someone is low in tyrosine, then they can't make thyroid hormone and they're going to have weight problems and have slower thinking and lose their hair and just be tired. And they also have trouble making dopamine, so concentration is difficult. And you can pep talk people all you want, but if they're missing the structural biochemistry to make the thing to make them do more of the things, a la dopamine, well, the pep talk is only going to go, it's going to have a ceiling of effectiveness. Same thing with, like, if they're having problems with their gut and their digestion, like they've got hidden gut infections. And I'm not talking about like Montezuma's Revenge or something. I'm talking about these kind of like background, like gut infections. They will eat your nutrition on your behalf. They'll excrete their own toxins and cause problems in your gut. They will burrow in and they'll cause all sorts of problems that you then can't absorb the nutrients, whether it's from supplements or for food. So dealing with gut infections can be significant to people. And you also need a healthy gut to absorb amino acids to make neurotransmitters. I mean, this is just amino acids we're talking about. Not even touching on vitamins, minerals, fatty acids, and all the rest. So the neuroharmony method is a way to have a framework to analyze everyone's lifestyle, and there's 10 factors to someone's lifestyle, and then to analyze their labs, and there's a multitude of different types of labs. So that's if an adult male on the spectrum comes to see me. Adult females usually come to see me because they're dealing with um the 35 to 60 bracket for females. There's always some major transition in that time period, whether it's menopause or they want to have kids, or they are recovering from having kids, or they're having a tr they're there, there's a hormonal shift in their body and they're wanting to reclaim and prepare for the next phase of their life, or there's a major relationship shift, the into a relationship or out of a relationship, or whatnot. And this is where the Neuro Harmony method also is incredibly valuable because you've got a template to analyze what's going on from the lifestyle versus what's going on internally with the labs. And so, for example, with lifestyle, one of the 10 pillars of the lifestyle analysis is sleep. Now, that may sound obvious, but it may be obvious, but it hasn't been fully detailed. And like there's like 12 major reasons that people can wake up in the middle of the night, between over 1 and 3. And each of those reasons has a unique issue behind it. Then there's and sleep is the thing in modern day society that's been kind of pushed to the side the most frequently. Then there's what are people's morning routines? What's their evening routines? Exercise. Exercise there can be too much, like marathoning is an example of too much. I have a blog post that was titled "Why Marathoners Look Like Cancer Patients." And I know that's very provocative for some people to read, but it's true. I grew up right outside Heartbreak Hill for the Boston Marathon, and people marathon look terrible. Sorry. And there's a reason for that. And then on the flip side, you've got the CrossFit enthusiasts who end up being overinflamed and injure themselves because they overexercise in a different way. And there is a way to understand how to exercise properly that takes into account a variety of movement, recovery, then the right mix of intensity and just consistent movement. And I make a distinction between exercise and movement. Most people think of exercise the same way they think of a four-letter word. So there's each one of these 10 categories has a lot of nuance in them, and people require different protocols depending on where they're at in the phase of their life, the phase of their health. And then the lab testing is incredibly valuable in this phase, because particularly for hormones, because if there's a lot of hormonal shifts that can happen, monthly alone, there's hormonal shifts, but especially in the 35 to 60 range. So it's different core issue, but the same approach, same filter of labs and lifestyle. And then for um, parents, the the primary issue that come up are like how can we help our child not suffer so much? I mean that's really the root of it. How can we just help them not suffer so much? And by extension, how can we stop suffering either directly from or out of empathic connection to the suffering of our child?
Mhm.
And and my the thing is that I don't work directly with the kids. And this again, this may be mind blowing for some parents to listen to, is because, well, because in my world, a child's health and well being starts with how much self care the parent models.
Mhm.
And my own, my own parents did not take care of themselves, with the sleep deprivation, the dysglycemia from eating, really bad food, the high stress that they didn't have the tools or the interest in handling except finding someone else to blame, usually me, because of my mere existence. The uh, and physical pain on this in the case of my mother, she was in a lot of pain, so she took a lot of painkillers. And there are certain painkillers that actually kill empathy. I mean, part of the emotional component of pain is numbed by Tylenol. And so if parents can self-care is not sacrificing your child. Self-care is a part of proper modeling for your child. And if the parents engage in self-care, and I understand the time constraints. I get that. And so look, part of there's ideal, then there's ordeal. But one has to know what the ideal is and then figure out what the ordeal in which to fit in a practical way if you're handling children. Like, and I'm not here to shame a parent into they simply don't have enough time to do certain things. That not at all. It's like, okay, what is realistic? What are you doing now? What can we like figuring out what the ordeal is and what can be supported there, and also just some I'll give some practical things. I would. I would encourage every parent listening to this, at the very minimum, become a sleep-centered family. Everyone wins if everyone gets better sleep. Everybody. Everybody. Your family's going to be happier. You're going to be happier. Your kid's going to be happier. Everything's going to be easier if everyone's more of a sleep center family. Staying up an extra 45 minutes to check the news or the latest cat video does not help. Does not help. Additionally, if you're going to focus on something outside of sleep, it's the morning routine, making sure that everyone is up, they get hydrated, there's some movement, and there's some actual real breakfast, not boxed cereal, glorified sugar, grain, chemical madness that we pass off as breakfast. Uh, and if we can get morning and evening routines really, really set up and just become a sleep-centered family and a breakfast-centered family, a lot can change just from that. A
Hmm.
lot. And with the parents, it's the same Neuro Harmony model. What's the lifestyle? What are the labs?
Hmm.
We've got and there's all sorts of labs to draw on. One of my favorites is genetics, which is very relevant to any parent. And looking at what is your unique needs genetically. What are your unique needs genetically? And that includes diet, like what are your trigger foods? What's your carb tolerance? How your genes influence your eating behaviors. Like some people are more averse to or less bothered by the taste of bitter. And if that's the case, genetically, if someone is averse to the flavor of bitter, then they're going to eat on average 100 to 200 pounds fewer vegetables per year. And then there's like four separate cooking strategies to make more bitter vegetables more palatable, for example. And that's genetic. Like if some people just have this aversion, and if they didn't know that it's genetic, that they can stop fighting it and start strategizing with it.
Right.
And then there's figuring out, are people more genetically prone to inflammation or not? Are they more prone to certain effectiveness of liver detox or not? Are they more or less prone to our ability to absorb vitamin D? I think synthesizing vitamin D from the sun is about six genes, and that's actually less important than the vitamin D receptors or VDR genes that bring vitamin D from the blood into the cells. You can get vitamin D into the blood from sunlight, food, and supplements, but getting it from blood into cell is the actual important bit, and that's the VDR genes. And that is and vitamin D, just to be really clear. I mean, technically, it's not a vitamin; it's actually a hormone. When you look at the structure, it's actually a hormone. And what it does, it's a hormone. It was just mislabeled at the time when it was discovered. Vitamin D controls between 3 and 5% of your entire genetic expression. Just vitamin D.
Wow.
And you know what? Not the bulk of it is not related to bone density. It's related to immunity and inflammation control. So that's just a couple examples. And the genetics can tell you if you're better suited for keto, paleo, Mediterranean, or higher carb. That technology exists now.
Hmm.
And my the good thing about a genetics test that is that you can do the test once and you're done because the results are permanent. These other tests like stools, hormone tests, gut testing, mitochondria testing, blood test, like those are incredibly valuable. But it's a thumbprint in one point in time, and the value of the data decays rapidly, especially at the 6 month mark, and then looking towards retesting at some point. But genetics is one and done. So it's the highest value investment in lab testing I can without even a close second. Not even close. So that's what I would say is that the neuroharmony method, the neuroharmony model is it's a combination of labs and lifestyle and and prioritizing what lifestyle and what labs are needed to get the results you're looking for you and your family.
Yeah, well, that's amazing that such a data-informed approach to be
Mhm.
able to really get to the root cause of the problem and be able to strategize and address it and feel empowered around it. So I appreciate all of those nuggets of wisdom that you're sharing. It's really
Thanks, Megan.
helpful. Well,
Yeah, and if people want to know more, my website is just drsamshay.com, drsamshay.com. There's a free, at that point of this recording, there's a free 3-day lifestyle nutrition guide. I got a lot of information on my website. I've got a YouTube channel with a couple hundred videos, including my comedy playlist, but I've got way, way, way more related to natural medicine and functional health. And people can also put my name, just Dr. Sam Shay, into any podcast player, and I'll pop up on multiple interviews. And I really appreciate, really appreciate us taking the time, as neurodiverse colleagues, both trying to help out in our own neurodistinct way.
Right.
Uh, it's great to have when we talked about labels. I mean, one of the reasons we're able to meet is that we both like, oh, you have a label? I got a label. Oh my God, let's talk about our labels together. Wow. It's
Yeah.
that's the power of having a label is we can find each other.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's really great. I love finding other passionate people who are change makers and really
Mhm.
mission driven to make the world a little bit better for all of us. So thank you.
Thank you, Megan.